morning. First of all, I want to start by congratulating Enrique Peret and his team and the U.S.-Mexican Foundation for putting together this amazing event over the last 3 days. As co-chair of last year's North American Forum, I'm very pleased to be back this year. And today, I'm thrilled to moderate the panel entitled Legislative Strategies for Regional Strength, which will delve into the importance of legislative support for North America's shared prosperity. I would like to welcome our amazing speakers, Mexican Senator and former Mayor of Nuevo León, Luis Donaldo Colosio, Catherine McKenna, founder and CEO of Climate and Nature Solutions and former member of Canadian Parliament, as well as environmental minister in Canada. Mexican Senator Alejandro Murat, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of Mexico, going to be very, very important in this environment. And Texas State Senator Nathan M. Johnson. Each of them have amazing bios and will add incredible value, and you can look at their bios on the app. So I want to start by framing the conversation on the importance of North American integration over the past 3 decades. The collaboration has strengthened all 3 countries in many positive ways. Commercially, it has turned Mexico into the US's largest trading partner, and Canada into Mexico's second largest trading partner. And I learned that we can dispute who's 1 and who's 2, Canada or Mexico, but it's basically the same thing. We're keeping it all in North America. And not only in trade, but our region faces currently a unique opportunity to unlock its full potential in terms of inclusive development, nearshoring, innovation, and competitiveness. Regionally, though, we have been overwhelmed by discussions regarding immigration, China, the political rhetoric, and the many obstacles we face, as opposed to the many positive opportunities. So how do we re-emphasize that there is shared prosperity when the 3 partners work together to be the most competitive region and innovative region in the world? And what is the role of the legislative collaboration to address these issues? I'm going to ask each of the 3 speakers to comment on this. So if you could start, Donaldo, what is the role of the legislature in the collaboration to address shared prosperity, trade, opportunity?
Hello, good morning. I thank the invitation to be here, delighted to be here. We need to bear in mind 30-something years ago, when talks about NAFTA were being implemented, there was a lot of talk about countries who entered these sort of agreements were practically giving away a part of their sovereignty, a part of their prosperity. It was never going to work. There were a lot of questions, a lot of backlash, and a lot of doubts about these treaties. If anything we've seen in the past 3 decades is that integration and cooperation across the border really does ensure that many sectors, regions, and professions and industries really do very, very well. But then, when you cross the border, it presents challenges. Migration challenges, tariff challenges, things that you need to accommodate from the Senate, or from Congress, from a legislative perspective, in order to make things work, to iron things out, to smooth everything over. Because otherwise, we're still going to be faced with the same challenges we would be facing with any other country in the world. The thing about this region is we have found the way to integrate us in a very productive way, but we also have to bear in mind something that is going on. And I think in all three countries right now, we are all living major political changes at the moment that will, in many ways, at least in Mexico, we're seeing it, is going to profoundly transform the way we do government on a domestic scale. And that is going to present also several challenges, because we will need, on the legislative level and on the treaty level, the renegotiation of the USMCA coming up soon, in order for us as nations to understand the changes that our neighbors are going through and ensure that despite those changes, because we cannot interfere with their sovereignty, as we as Mexicans will not allow any other nation to intervene with ours, we do need to adapt our laws and our treaties in order for economic integration to still be something that can be procured. And especially that your investments, whether they are local investments or international investments, can be secured. There's a lot of backlash, and I think we will discuss that in a few minutes, about the judicial reform that is undergoing right now in Mexico. But the thing is, once we ensure conditions for judicial certainty, to certain degrees of predictability, we can ensure the safety of said investments. And that's what we as legislators have the responsibility to do in the years to come.
Thank you very much. Catherine.
Well, first of all, it's great to be here. And I guess it's 30 years since NAFTA came in, although we now have a new agreement that has a variety of different names. In Canada, it's CUSMA. I was just looking at the butterflies. The last time I was in Mexico, I went to Michoacan, which if you haven't been, it's obviously amazing. But I think it's just a reminder that borders in a way are extremely important, but they're also in the world we live in with globalization, they're also, there's pollution doesn't know any borders. Climate change doesn't know any borders. And by the way, the people here who do business want to just do more business with Canada, Mexico, and the US. And so I think this is really the opportunity right now to take a more sophisticated view. So we're 30 years, I actually was against free trade. I'm a trade lawyer, which is ironic. But when I was younger, we were like, oh, trade, maybe that's very bad for Canada, probably thinking we couldn't compete. But the reality is we could compete, Mexico could compete, the US can compete, and it's a great opportunity. But I think we need to think about climate, trade, and energy security as the same thing. And that really provides opportunities. Now with the US, so Canada and Mexico should always say tight, because the US, they have their very particular perspective on things. We saw that in the renegotiation of NAFTA. But I think that there really is this opportunity to think about three areas I see, and I'm happy to go in more details. One is just the pure pollution climate front. We should be working together because we should have legislation. We should be thinking strategically, including through NAFTA, through the Commission on Economic Cooperation, on how do we make it a race to the top, not a race to the bottom. So, you can get around environmental laws by saying, well, this is trade. So that there is a framework for that, and the president, and by the way, a first woman president, pretty awesome. But she's been pretty clear on the opportunity of the NAFTA renegotiation in terms of the environment and climate. And actually, we should actually put the words climate change in it, just saying. But the second thing and third thing I think are more interesting. So the second area is like just pure trade opportunities when it comes to clean. So clean energy corridors. Now that will require folks actually figuring out how to get projects built. That can be hard through environmental assessments and getting actually convincing people that this is good. But there is a huge opportunity. And by the way, people are concerned about China. And China definitely sees climate, energy security, and trade as the same thing. So does Europe, and increasingly so does the US. Maybe we talked about, maybe not everyone in Congress, but I work with the Biden administration. They certainly see it like that. And that includes supply chains. That includes thinking on our supply chains, how do we provide opportunities so that it's Canada, the US, and Mexico, not products maybe coming from outside of those regions necessarily. Now, I'm a trade lawyer, so we have to be smart about these things. And then the third area is a little bit technical, but it's carbon pricing, carbon markets, and border carbon adjustments. They are coming. So trade is actually, and climate are actually finally getting their act together so that we are using trade tools to reduce emissions. And Europe is already saying they're having border carbon adjustments. They're already stepped up the process, so that is going to target hard to decarbonize sectors, steel, aluminum, other sectors. And so I really think this is the time for Canada, the US, and Mexico to be very strategic about how do we unite this and think strategically about how we can be tackling climate, but also through trade measures. And the last thing I'll say on carbon markets is I think that we've seen at state levels often there's a lot of innovation in that space, so I think there's opportunities there too.
Thank you very much. Senator Johnson, you have a unique perspective because you're in the state Senate, and as we know, the states, the U.S. has agreements at a national level, but we also, each state has agreements also with Mexico and other countries. So you might want to comment from that perspective.
Certainly, and whenever a state senator gets his ego up, they remind him he's a state senator. It's a different level.
I think it would be kind of cool if you were a national senator.
Well, I think I look at this, the role of legislatures, especially state legislatures, in the context of the shared prosperity and the importance of the relationships between the North American countries of Mexico, the United States, and Canada. I think I come to it from perspective similar to what we just heard from Senator Colosio, and that is of change. I believe that we are I think it's obvious that all three countries are in a time of significant political change, but globally and in our hemisphere, we are in a time of rapid, intense change on a technological level, socioeconomic levels, cultural levels. All of that is going to create a tremendous storm where old institutions, old infrastructure, old political ways of doing things are becoming worn out. And we are connected through our histories, we're connected through our economies, and as the whole world goes through this storm of change, I think it's going to be most expedient for all of us to rely on our friends who are standing right next to us, rather than to try to look outside of the Northern Hemisphere to places where we've never been, to places where we don't have a shared history. The reason the state legislatures and the independent states and the state senators in Mexico, the provinces of Canada, the consulates, the prime ministers, sorry, not the prime ministers, never mind the executives, that's my point here. Executives can have meetings and they can keep the press out in the foyer and they can talk about grand sweeping changes to which we all aspire. But the work that gets done comes out of conversations among people in this room, among people on this stage. We are going to have to see, I think, more leadership come at the legislative level because the executive level has become so victim to the world of quick headlines and sound bites and clicks that it's really difficult to have serious conversations at the highest levels. So I think all of us are having more serious conversations. In my own experience as a state senator, I lament that we're trying to do some serious work in the legislature sometimes, and I hear some big announcement, either from the President of the United States or from the governor, that sends everything into turmoil. And then we can't even have lunch together.
Well, thank you. Senator Murat, you get the last word on this question. I mean, the role of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee in Mexico is going to be huge. And so tell us a little bit how you expect that to play out in terms of convincing and working towards shared prosperity and trade.
Thank you, Susan. Well, the first thing we need to do is change the narrative. I think that if we understand what's happening today in the world, it's that we're right now in extremes in the political dialogue. And I think that the parliaments should have open dialogue to maintain stability in this moment of extremes in the political discourse. If we have open dialogues independently from the political atmosphere, I think we can focus on what's important, which are the technical issues. And then we can understand, we can celebrate, for example, what's happened with NAFTA and TECMEC. Maybe today we think this is basically a vested right, but it's not. We need to celebrate that Canada, Mexico are the most important partners with the US economically. But we need also to understand which are the challenges that we face today. I think that one of the biggest challenges in this extreme atmosphere is migration all over the world. But we need to understand now that migration isn't only, for example, the border. We need to understand that it's the whole country. For example, I'm from the state of Oaxaca, and we have more than 1 million Oaxacans in Illinois. And we have right now in Oaxaca more than 150,000 Venezuelans. And if we don't generate the projects, for example, infrastructure projects that can be fostered by the trilateral agreement that we have financially, we won't change that. Migration won't go away. It's the necessity of labor for people. So if we generate alternatives, and you just talked about it, Susan, for example, nearshoring. Nearshoring is a great opportunity for the trilateral agreements that we have today. Today we have the interoceanic corridor in Oaxaca that can become not a wall, but a bridge for labor with all these diasporas that are moving around in Central America and South America. So if we from the Senate can generate that open dialogue and focus on what's important, not only in labor, Catherine just mentioned the environment, trade, security, and other issues that affect our great trilateral agreement, I think we can go forward and build and generate value.
So I'm already about to go off script. I think that's a really interesting and important comment that you've made. And I would be interested in your view and anybody else on the stage's view, instead of just thinking about the Mexican legislature thinking about this, is there an opportunity for the three countries' legislatures to be dialoguing about this and working with each other to create the alternative dialogue to that dialogue which politically is out there for other reasons?
Short answer or long answer?
Medium answer.
Short answer is yes, we can. The thing is, we need to really focus on the issues that we can actually solve. Because there's a lot of rhetoric going on in each of our countries towards many of these subjects. Migration being, I think, chiefly the main one of them.
Yes.
And the issue about migration is in the scopes of international agreement like USMCA, what you need to understand is that many employers, many of these enterprises, which are primarily the first and foremost users of USMCA, they want the migration policies to be much more relaxed.
I
Because
couldn't agree more.
the workforces of the three countries want also to be able to move freely between borders in order to generate a much more robust workforce experience. And also, the niche specialization that some industries need many times cannot be met by the local workforce. So those realities make us at least obligated to sit down and discuss what sorts of ways can we, without having a completely open borders, because that could be chaotic, how can we shift our migration policies in order to have employers take full responsibility in order to grant these workers legal access across borders much more freely, because that is something that hinders a lot the productivity of the whole region.
Susan, it's essentially prerequisite to getting almost anything else done. We're all talking about the border. We've had 75 or 80 years of neglect of the border by United States administrations. We finally see some activity in the Congress, but if we can get some pressure and cooperation from Mexico and Canada, we can at least demonstrate some progress in the issue and diffuse it politically and start working on everything else.
Senator Murat, and then I want to come back to Catherine, because actually migration is something, and temporary worker visas is something Canada does better than any of us.
Well, maybe Mexico would have a different view right now, but
Yeah.
And I totally agree. That's why the Senate should play as a diplomatic bridge. And I think that's the focus. And to be a diplomatic bridge, for example, we need to reactivate the interparliamentary reunions that we had with the US Senate. Yesterday I was with a Canadian senator, and we talked about generating the first interparliamentary meeting with our Canadian counterparts. So today, or not senator, member of parliament, but what's important is that as long as we can maintain this dialogue open, we can generate the stability that maybe sometimes the political atmosphere doesn't help.
Right.
And as it has been mentioned here, we can focus on the important issues like trade, water, energy, environment, labor, and celebrate, and you just mentioned, for example, the labor mobility that we've been able to generate with agriculture between Canada and Mexico.
Yes.
But we need to go to the next frontier. And the next frontier is generate trilateral projects focused on labor and migration and generate economic value going forward, I think.
Catherine,
So, I mean, the
Canada
problem
does
is
this well.
there's so, like, the lack of sophistication at the highest levels when the issue of immigration is discussed is disheartening. I mean, I think there are some real challenges, and to be honest, in Canada, we're facing a new government pretty quick, likely, that falls into that trap of extreme rhetoric. It has nothing to do with reality. There are challenges. There will always be challenges when you share borders with folks, but you get people riled up, and then they combine with misinformation and disinformation. It makes it very hard for centrists, and I'm with a centrist party, to actually do the real things that improve lives and that foster trade. And of course we need skilled workers, and we need workers. Like in Canada, you know, we have so many Mexicans that leave their families and actually, you know, ensure that we have food security in our own country. But of course it's beyond that. And of course I'm very focused on climate right now, because I think climate is an everything issue. It's a national security issue, it's a trade issue, it's a health issue, it's a inequality issue. And we need skilled workers.
And a migration issue.
I mean, so migration, and we're gonna have, obviously, you know, we're gonna have climate refugees. We see that in context, but it's like this is all disconnected. I mean, what I would like to see is North America, and by the way, CUSMA, or whatever the heck you want to call it, wherever you're from, actually has provisions for environment, labor, trade. That's the point. We created this agreement and we renegotiated kind of something quite similar, and we spent a lot of time on it, but it is a framework agreement to have more sophisticated conversations. And I think that's where you talk about legislatures, not, you know, I can see when you look at the highest level, I go to my parliament, and I left 3 years ago, and I cannot believe the discussion. It's actually so disheartening, and it's so facts-free. But I think if you can take it on a state legislature or, you know, a different level, but also at a technical level, like, because I mean, there are real things that have to be done. So people can be yelling up here and saying all these things that are not grounded in reality, although there are some truths, and those truths sometimes play out, and the public is not, I've always said the public's not stupid. They understand that there are challenges. You have to actually work with your own public and address real concerns. But I think we could do a lot. And this, like, I work with unions in the US, very, very large unions, and they can't get enough workers on the green transition. So like, we need plumbers, we need pipe fitters, we need like a whole range of people across our economies. And that's where we can create real job opportunities, real trade opportunities, but also deal with climate and also energy security, or broader, you know, security issues that we face in a very challenging world.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And you look at jobs. I mean, we are at full employment in the United States. We lack workers. Restaurants can't open because 7 days a week, because they can't find enough people to work in them in the area in Connecticut that I come from. It's crazy. So you talked a little bit about micro issues. I'd like to come back to you, Senator Johnson, because you talked about the fact that we talk about migration and it just highlights all of the obstacles that we can't accomplish. Could you turn that around and talk about the positive opportunity? How do we turn this dialogue into something positive and try to create positive outcomes for North America?
I think reference to facts is often useful. There's a lot of, you were talking a moment ago about the realities of migration. The fact is that Texas has disproportionate burden when people come into Texas, and they do require health services, they do require all sorts of social services and education, and it becomes a negative conversation when people talk about how much that's costing. What is not in the public conversation is how much immigrants, unauthorized immigrants, contribute to the Texas economy through the work they do, through the taxes they pay, through federal payroll taxes, through property taxes, through sales taxes, and actually what you see economically is a net positive revenue to the state of Texas due to illegal migration. Now, we don't really want to have a conversation like that, but let's just not have half of it. So when we start to examine, okay, you know what, economically this is not an issue. What can it be? It can be that we have construction jobs filled. It can be that we have dreamers who become citizens and contribute to the country, or go back home and we have a stronger relationship with those two nations. Since we have a history of migration throughout North America, instead of trying to separate into two walls separating three regions, if we can recognize the economic value of migration, I think it becomes far more positive.
And how do we change the dialogue in the U.S., in the southern part of the U.S., and make when people think about Mexico, not think about migration, but think about all the positive trade and investment opportunities, cross-border investment opportunities in all three countries?
And when you see rail lines coming in from new ports, when you see pipelines going from Texas to the Yucatan, when you see all the economic benefits of manufacturing of new government incentivized microchip manufacturing, where we have labor in the US sending parts to Mexico, labor in Mexico sending parts to the US. This is going to be a supply chain resiliency win once these three nations are more closely integrated. And that's something that COVID and this last half-decade experience should have on all of our minds. We're going to be much stronger if we are able to integrate more completely.
Senator Murat, you're looking like you have a comment.
Well, yeah. I think we also need to think out of the box. I think we haven't done that lately. For example, I was thinking, we always talk about economic zones, right? We're working on that right now in Mexico. I just mentioned the interoceanic corridor. But how about we add economic zones with migration zones, so that we have hubs where people that want to be and have labor mobility, and we have that demand, we can generate areas of economic growth. And let's think out of the box and say, let's think about the North American Development Bank. And let's say we can generate that funding. And then let's start thinking about how we can promote those economic zones, focusing on emerging technologies, fostering innovation, promoting data sharing. And I think that's a good example of regional projects that trilateral relationship hasn't focused or fostered at all. And that's what I mean when I think about the next frontier. Because what's happening today is we're going backwards with this extreme political dialogue that's around the world. And we're not focusing on the strengths that have led us to have the strongest economic region in the world. And those are some examples that I think we need to start generating in this parliamentary dialogue. Because sometimes when you have this diplomacy in the parliaments, it's easier because let's face it, the executive branches sometimes have a hard time, changing the discourse. But maybe we can do the side work and help them out. And once we have something worked out, maybe it's easier for the executive branches to bring something forward.
Senator Colosio, do you agree with that? What do you see the opportunity for Mexico really leveraging the Senate?
I mean, we have to bear in mind that these new challenges that we are facing in a completely new world also pose great opportunities to consolidate the economic region that we've been growing for the past at least 3 decades. Thing is, I agree with Senator Murat that political discourse right now in the world is very extremist.
Polarized.
And it's very polarized, and it's very, I don't know, it's that division that goes on not only between nations but also within nations is a very difficult arena to work with. And it's a very dangerous game to play with politically. Because, and we were talking about this earlier, I mean, the only way I can describe it is populism in the rhetoric. And we don't have to consider populism to be just a left thing or a right thing. I mean, anybody can be a populist. And the thing about populism is that it's very popular. But it makes for very lousy public policy. And that therein lies the threat, but also the challenge as legislators. Because we need to be able to look beyond that dogmatic rhetoric and work on the facts. And I think it was you, Catherine, that said earlier. In many of these forums, many of these discussions, many parliaments and many congresses, people are starting to forget the facts. And you may have your own opinions, you may have your own challenges and your own things to consider, and you bring them to the table, and you ask your counterpart to please consider this, and this is something that is a no-no for me, and this is something that I can maybe concede to you, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And that is something that we as a region need to understand, independently of the political circumstance that each of our nations is undergoing. Because we do have shared interests, but also shared responsibilities that we have built over the last 3 decades that are not so easily undone.
So, Catherine, one of these, we talked about polarization, and unfortunately, climate, environment has become polarized, at least in the United States. How do we try to change that and make it into a very positive dialogue? You mentioned linking it to trade and economic prosperity, but could you expand on that, please?
Well, I mean, in a way, it's bonkers, right? Because everyone's seeing the impacts of climate change. I mean, we can look anywhere. Turn on the TV right now. There's like somewhere that is having a hurricane, floods, extreme heat. I mean, our infrastructure is not resilient. I was talking to someone, major infrastructure asset owner, just like the actual cost to the direct risk, not even indirect risk, is huge. But I mean, look, I want to take it slightly in a different direction here. So who here isn't in a government? Like you are with a business in North America, or you are with a not-for-profit, or somehow not a government. So let's see a show of hands. I'm also testing if you're awake. Okay, so guess what happens in government? People lobby. So you all have a voice. To be honest, that business actually matters. Yeah. So if you say, these are the facts, like I got to trade, so I hear you talking about random things that aren't even reality. Like actually, you want jobs in our state or a province or whatever it is, like you have a voice. And the one thing I've noticed, and it's also in climate, you have a voice. Like you can say, actually, we need carbon pricing or we need X. As opposed to quietly saying, yeah, we're kind of worried about this, but then maybe lobbying against climate action. But it goes to also North America. Like if you are a business person or whomever you are has an interest in the North American economy, go to your legislator and say, like, I actually need you to do more. I need you to reduce barriers. I need you to facilitate trade. I need you to actually think of North America as a region, because I'm creating jobs. You aren't. Your government, look, I was in government. I mean, government doesn't create jobs. Businesses create jobs. And then I really think that is a reality check, because businesses don't, I mean, hopefully live in conspiracy theories, because it doesn't work. Like conspiracy theories, you have to work in the real world of like, you sell a widget or whatever, service, whatever you're doing. So actually I think business is not just a random actor. You actually have power. You have power to go and say, you want jobs, you want growth, I'm bringing that, this is what I need from you, and stop inflaming this rhetoric, which is extremely unhelpful. And then the other thing I would say is I was actually struck yesterday when the ambassadors were talking about the lack of education, like movement of students between the three countries. We need to get more young people going back and forth, because maybe older people, and I'm old, so I'm an older person, but maybe older people don't get it because they don't travel enough, and 50% of Americans don't have passports, apparently, like
Congress.
of Congress. You said Congress, okay. They probably go to Mexico. A lot of people go to Mexico for holidays, probably, and same in Canada, but I do think that that's another opportunity, because people-to-people connections are a real thing. Like the businesses here, you all know this, right? You have friends, you meet with people, your supply chain, suppliers. We need young people to break this. And young people, I think, are generally quite different. Now, they're susceptible, of course, to polarization and to disinformation and misinformation, but send kids to different places. Like if we did that and people are like, oh, this is amazing. Wow, I'm learning a lot here. There's a lot more to offer. I think that breaks down a lot, because when you know people and you realize people are just people and that you actually can work together despite, you may have some cultural differences or background differences, that it's an opportunity. My dad was an immigrant to Canada. He loved Canada as much as Ireland. But I think we're gonna have to dig deep, and we're gonna have to accept the reality that the world is changing and there are many challenges, but there are ways to break that down. So I do make a call for business people and folks here, use your voices, call your legislator, your senator, your congressman, your MP, and say, I don't like this. Like, we just have to be practical.
I think you're making a really important point. And the really important point that you're making is that if you want shared prosperity, we need to have shared responsibility.
Yeah.
And that's from business to government, all executive branch, Senate, Congress, everywhere. We need to have shared responsibility, and we need to speak up. So we have 6 minutes left, and I'm going to give each one of you, starting with you, Senator Murat, the opportunity to tell us what the one thing we need to do to promote shared prosperity over the next year.
Well, for starters, we need to change, as I mentioned, the narrative.
I'll make it longer. Make it 1 year and then longer term.
Okay.
Well, the first thing is just, we need to change the narrative. I just mentioned parliamentary diplomacy clearly will give us the continuity that we need to establish this new type of dialogue, focusing on those shared interests that have benefited the trilateral relationship. And also understanding the challenges. And when we understand the challenges, then we can understand that shared responsibility that we have. And clearly the biggest issue today that's generating an obstacle for our relationship is migration. And as long as we don't address migration issues, the relationship will have some obstacles. And the way to address migration issues is to generate economic prosperity, because migration is only the result of people wanting to have a better quality of life. So the first thing that we need to understand is that if we can generate, I was mentioning economic and migration zones, we can start changing the dialogue and have areas where we have areas that people can go and generate that quality of life and maybe then go back to their countries. Now, what can we do in the Senate? Clearly, we can generate this type of forums. We need to maintain the issues that we want to promote.
Senator, we're running out of time.
Yes. So regional forums, maybe strengthening our legislation in the region by harmonizing more the legislation in trade, labor, and other issues. And of course, something we haven't mentioned, we need to focus on the TECMEC evaluation that will come up in the next 2 years. And we have to be very clear that all the three countries are set so that this can continue to give us prosperity.
And clearly, legislature is going to have a role in this. Senator.
Yes.
Yes, you earlier asked what we could do to change the dialogue. I agree with Senator here that we absolutely must change the dialogue. Yes, the U.S. has to have some immigration reform so we can stop tempting state legislatures to do stupid things and focus on the more productive things. But to your question, what can we do to change that dialogue? We can all say stuff. We are saying stuff. We will say stuff. But I think we're going to have to show it. And I want to pick up on what Catherine was talking about here. Energy is maybe one of the best ways we can show it. If we can show cooperative efforts on infrastructure and major challenges in water, electricity that will facilitate all of this trade, lift people out of energy and actual economic poverty, that's going to change the dialogue a great deal. After the fact, we say, look what we did. And that is actually where we talk about legislatures as opposed to the executive, because how often do you get the president on the phone or the governor on the phone? You can get me and my colleagues up here on the phone a lot more frequently, and I've already scheduled meetings with probably 3 of you to come visit us in Austin in February. So I think a greater interaction with industry with an eye towards actual accomplishment will go a long way towards changing the dialogue.
Thank you very much. Catherine.
I mean, look, you took it. First of all, we got to get through some elections. So that's a thing. And I think there are issues, including in Canada. The big issue in Canada is housing, and that gets obviously weirdly related to migration sometimes, and sometimes governments drop the ball a little bit potentially. But I do think it's just doing things. Just do things. Show progress. So just show that you can actually do energy corridors. You can build infrastructure. You do things, because then you can point to things. Because what people don't want to hear when I was in politics is they don't want to hear lofty rhetoric. They don't care. They don't believe politicians. They're sick of politicians. They actually want to see things. And I was infrastructure minister. And the things that people cared about, they were like, wow, there's a very big bridge. The Gordie Howe Bridge between Canada and the US is now done. And they're like, wow, that's a thing. There was loads of jobs. And I'm taking just one random example, but I think getting things done, and that's where the business community really has a role to play, because you do things. You don't sit around and fight because you're not going to make any money. You're going to go out of business. So I think that's the opportunity. And then I think renegotiating CUSMA, or whatever you call it, I do think is an opportunity to be much more sophisticated. And there are real things there that actually enhance as opposed to impede trade, the environment, the economy, security.
Thank you. Donaldo.
Well, in this next year, I think, as Senator Johnson was showing it is part of the thing that we need to do amongst the three nations. And what we need to show is stability. This sort of predictability of the outcome of that my investment and what I want to do, and that my enterprise, my workers, my workforce, it's going to be taken care of if I go to your country. I mean, each country must work internally in the next few months to show our partners that stability in many areas, not just political stability, talking about our elections or our reorganization of judicial schemes. We need to, for example, Mexico, we need to show stability politically, in infrastructure, in environment, of course, in natural resources. Energy is a big issue in Mexico. But we also need to show judicial stability, because we're right now experiencing a change in our judicial system. In order for foreign investments, but also local investments, to have that air of certainty of, it's taken care of. It's the only way, at least in the next few months, that we are going to enter the USMCA revision with an open mind, but also an open heart. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult. And the only way to ensure political, but also economical and in general, shared prosperity among the region on the long term is education. It's really to up the ante, you really double down on the innovation, on technology, on academic formation, and the development of prepared workforce that can eventually take these responsibilities across borders.
So with that, we have a blinking light which says our time is up. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank all of you. I think this has been an incredibly productive conversation. Hopefully it's just the beginning of this kind of dialogue and this kind of discussion, which can move the agenda forward in a positive way. But I think one of the things that came out of this is we've got to change the narrative and solve in a proactive way the problems confronting us, particularly around migration, which is going to be critical to changing the dialogue. And with that, I think we all talked about, and a really good point that Catherine made, this is all about shared prosperity and shared opportunity and shared responsibility for all of us in this room and in all 3 countries to play a very important role. So thank you very much, and thank you again to the panelists.